Hello everyone and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In a twist that even longtime Sister Wives fans didn't see coming, the emotional storm surrounding Gabriel and Garrison Brown has erupted into something far more dramatic, far more heartbreaking, and far more revealing than anyone expected, with the truth finally spilling out about why Kody Brown secretly pushed his own sons out of the family circle long before the world realized what was happening, painting a picture of a father so consumed by control, ego, and loyalty tests that his relationship with his adult children became collateral damage in a war he believed he had to win, even if it meant losing the very people who loved him the most, and the person who suffered the most, yet stayed the most silent, was none other than Gabriel Brown, who went from being the sweet, soft-spoken son who defended the family to the young man who found himself effectively destroyed, emotionally shattered, and evicted from the life he once knew, all because Kody's temper, insecurity, and obsession with loyalty spiraled into something darker during the pandemic years when he became more paranoid, more rigid, and more unwilling to hear anything other than his own voice echoing back to him, with Robin's influence tightening around him like a rope that slowly separated him from everyone else, especially his older children who refused to bow down to his increasingly bizarre house rules. And the tragedy in all of this, what makes fans still furious today, is how the entire situation escalated not because of malice from the boys, but because they dared to question the shifting rules and inconsistencies of their father who, instead of listening, instead of guiding, instead of trying to understand, turned their concerns into perceived attacks, ultimately pushing Gabriel out of his emotional world and forcing Garrison out of the physical one, with the culmination arriving the moment Kody told Janelle in a chilling, dismissive tone that her sons were disrespectful, disobedient, and dangerous to the family culture he and Robin wanted to preserve, even though everyone else could see that what he meant was actually that they didn't worship Robin as the center of the universe, didn't treat Kody's new preferences as gospel, and didn't pretend that the family was still functional when it was clearly falling apart. And as tensions escalated behind the scenes, Gabriel found himself absorbing the emotional blows because he always had a soft heart, always wanted his dad's approval, always tried to be the peacekeeper, and yet he became the one who broke down when the cameras weren't rolling, the one who cried after Kody forgot his birthday, the one who felt the sting of being replaced, silenced, and ignored. And while viewers only got glimpses of this unraveling, insiders and family clues suggested the truth was far more devastating, with Gabriel realizing that no matter what he said, how he pleaded, or how respectfully he tried to communicate, Kody viewed him as an obstacle rather than a son, a threat rather than a voice deserving compassion, and that realization became the emotional eviction that fans now refer to as the moment Gabriel was truly destroyed, not in a physical sense but in the way his trust, his hope, and his sense of belonging were ripped away from him, leaving him to rebuild his own life in the shadow of a father who repeatedly chose distance over reconciliation. And while Garrison handled things with anger, standing his ground, refusing to coddle Kody's ego, and ultimately being pushed away physically when Kody told Janelle the boys needed to move out, Gabriel handled things quietly, almost silently, the emotional bruises deepening as Kody continued spinning narratives about disrespect, even though every outsider could see that what he interpreted as disrespect was nothing more than his children holding him accountable for his inconsistency, favoritism, and sudden pandemic-era transformation into a man who believed any disagreement was a personal attack. And perhaps the darkest layer of this entire situation is how easily Kody seemed to justify pushing his sons away, as though removing them from his world was the only way to maintain the fantasy family dynamic he'd built with Robin, who, whether intentionally or unintentionally, became the gravitational center of every decision he made, and viewers watched in disbelief as Kody twisted facts, rewrote history, and placed blame on Gabriel and Garrison while ignoring the emotional wreckage he was creating in his wake, leaving Janelle trapped between a husband who wanted compliance and sons who wanted fairness, until the breaking point finally arrived when Kody decided that the two young men living in Janelle's home, paying their own way, supporting the family, and contributing to the household, were suddenly unwelcome simply because they refused to bow down to rules that didn't make sense, and this led to the moment fans describe as the unofficial eviction. The moment Kody demanded Janelle choose between supporting her sons or aligning with him, an ultimatum so manipulative that even Christine later said she couldn't believe he was forcing someone to betray their own children in order to maintain marital peace, and as Janelle chose her sons, the fallout became inevitable, creating a permanent fracture in the family structure that pushed Gabriel further into emotional isolation, especially as the rest of the siblings watched their dad openly choose Robin's children while creating distance with the older ones, making Gabriel feel increasingly invisible, unnecessary, and unwanted, and fans still argue that this emotional abandonment was the cruelest part of the entire saga because it wasn't a single incident or a sudden blow. It was a slow erosion, a gradual pushing out, a subtle but consistent pattern of Kody choosing absence, excuses, and self-preservation over the tiny, fragile opportunities to rebuild trust with his son, until finally, Gabriel seemed to give up trying, seeing that nothing he did mattered, nothing he offered was appreciated, and nothing he shared, including his pain, was enough to make his father show up, call, or care the way a father should, and this is where the destroyed narrative truly emerges. Not as sensationalism, but as a haunting reflection of how deeply family rejection can scar a young man who once adored his father, a young man who now carries the emotional weight of a relationship that dissolved in real time on national television, leaving viewers heartbroken, enraged, and more convinced than ever that the real reason Gabriel and Garrison were pushed out had nothing to do with disrespect, safety, or pandemic rules, but instead everything to do with the uncomfortable truth that Kody couldn't handle being challenged, couldn't handle being held accountable, and couldn't handle facing the reality that his adult children no longer feared him, idolized him, or depended on him in the way he demanded. And so, rather than evolving, apologizing, or reconnecting, he chose the easiest route. He distanced himself, emotionally cut ties, blamed everyone else, and created a narrative where he was the victim of his own son's rebellion, even though fans saw right through it, and that is why the legacy of this moment endures. Why fans continue to revisit it, analyze it, criticize it, and mourn it. Because the eviction wasn't just physical for Garrison or emotional for Gabriel, it was symbolic of the collapse of the Brown family's bond, a collapse that is still echoing in their lives today, leaving viewers with one haunting question. How does a father repair something he spent years destroying? And more importantly, can Gabriel ever fully heal from being pushed out of the family he once believed would never give up on him? And as the months rolled on, and the cameras kept capturing the unraveling of the Brown family, fans realized that the true tragedy wasn't just the fights, the accusations, or the petty arguments. It was the silence that grew around Gabriel, a silence so heavy it became louder than any on-screen shouting match, because while Garrison channeled his frustration into independence and blunt confrontations, Gabriel internalized everything, carrying around the invisible bruise of being the son who kept trying long after the relationship was already slipping through his fingers, and the pain became especially evident when viewers realized how little Kody seemed to miss him, how rarely he mentioned him, and how effortlessly he dismissed the idea of rebuilding with him, showing a coldness that stunned even those who had watched Kody's behavior decline over the years. And each time Gabriel appeared on screen, more subdued, more withdrawn, more quiet, fans couldn't help but notice the way his eyes carried the weight of someone who had been emotionally abandoned, the way his voice held that soft tremble that only comes from trying not to break down, and the way his shoulders slumped, not out of defiance but out of defeat, because he had tried harder than most would, tried to keep the connection alive even as his father pulled away again and again. And that emotional exhaustion became the most heartbreaking part of the entire saga, especially as the other siblings rallied around him, trying to reassure him that the family rift wasn't his fault, trying to remind him that he deserved better, and yet the wound remained open because what Gabriel truly wanted, what he needed, was for his father to see him, hear him, and acknowledge his pain. But acknowledgement was something Kody was no longer capable of giving, not when he had convinced himself that distancing from his older children was justified, Not when Robin's emotional narratives reinforced the idea that anyone questioning Kody's decisions was attacking the family, and not when he saw loyalty only in terms of obedience rather than mutual respect. And this rigid mindset, this emotional tunnel vision, became the real reason the eviction storyline escalated the way it did, because Kody didn't just want compliance. He wanted complete alignment, complete devotion, complete surrender to his authority, something his adult sons were no longer willing to give. And when he realized he couldn't control them the way he controlled his younger children, the easiest solution, in his mind, was to push them out, to erase the challenge, to remove the friction, without ever addressing the source of conflict within himself. And this refusal to self-reflect, this inability to recognize his role in the downfall of the relationships, only deepened the fracture between him and Gabriel, leaving the young man caught in the emotional crossfire of a father who chose pride over connection and a mother who chose her sons over preserving a broken marriage. And while Janelle tried to hold everything together, tried to keep communication open, tried to protect her boys from the worst of the emotional fallout, even she couldn't shield Gabriel from the harsh truth that his father simply wasn't fighting for him, wasn't trying to fix things, wasn't willing to take even the smallest steps toward repairing the damage. And it was in those moments, those quiet moments off camera, those nighttime thoughts, those internal battles, that Gabriel continued to crumble. Not because he was weak, but because he had loved deeply, and losing that love from a parent cuts deeper than anything else. And viewers later admitted that they felt a kind of protective anger toward him, wishing they could reach through the screen and give him the comfort he wasn't receiving from his father. And even now, long after the initial conflict, the effects are still felt within the Brown family, with the distance lingering, the tension present, and the unresolved grief hovering like a shadow over every interaction. Because despite the attempts at healing, despite the public conversations, despite the passing of time, the core wound remains. Gabriel was emotionally evicted long before the fans knew it, pushed out of his father's heart as surely as Garrison was pushed out of his physical home, and the emotional wreckage of that decision continues to shape their lives, proving that sometimes the greatest destruction isn't loud or dramatic, it's quiet, slow, and devastatingly final.